Hey everyone, so I wanted to go into a bit more detail about the fuel system, or the tap on the ER5, because I mentioned in my service video about a workaround, or it wasn't so much a workaround as a precaution that I'd put in by putting in an on-off, a cut-off tap for the fuel line, and I just wanted to go into that in a little bit more detail, because these bikes do have an issue with, or can have an issue with, the petcock, vacuum petcock failing. So let's have a little look at what I've done there. Yeah, so I mean, the issue these bikes have is that they don't have a fuel pump. They work off a vacuum petcock. So it's a fuel tap. There's a vacuum hose coming in to the fuel tap that tells the system whether or not the engine needs fuel. So obviously when it's turned off, it's the carburetors aren't calling for fuel, so there's not an off position as such on the factory tap. You've got reserve, you've got prime, and you've got on. So when the tap is in either the reserve or the on position, in theory fuel should only be running through when the carburetors are calling for fuel. So that's where the vacuum part comes in. There is a prime position where you can force fuel through. Fuel will travel through whether or not the carburetors are calling for fuel. So you want to make sure that your tap is in either the reserve or the on position normally, because you don't want fuel running through. So the issue is that if the petcock fails and it's in either the reserve or the on position, when that fails, fuel can be running through, and that's fine as long as your floats are working in the carburetors. So if the floats stick because there's a bit of crud in your fuel, or they've gritted up or something, if your floats stick open and your petcock's failed and fuel's running through, the danger is that fuel will overflow the carbs and enter the the parts of the engine that it shouldn't be in. It'll get into the oil and all that kind of thing. So why does the tap fail? I mean, touch wood, it hasn't actually happened to me yet, but I was reading online that it can happen if you're using E10 rather than E5, because the E10 breaks down the fuel lines, it breaks down the I can't think of the word, the innards of the tap. It'll come to me in a minute. It can break down the diaphragm in the carburetor, that kind of thing. So the first thing is only ever run E5 in these bikes. But yeah, if the petcock fails, it can happen when the bike is sat. So it doesn't even have to be running for the fuel to start flowing through and overflowing everything. So to try and avoid that, what I've done, I'll just come around the other side of the bike so you can see. Yeah, what I've done is I've added in this on-off tap. So literally all I did, the carbs are quite hard to get to without taking the tank and everything off. And the fuel line that ran from the petcock to the carbs was good. So all I did, I unplugged the... let's go back round so I can show you once more. I unplugged the fuel line that runs out of the petcock into the carbs at the petcock end, so it's still attached to the carburetors. Unplugged it at the petcock end, so you've got vacuum hose in, you've got your reserve hose in, which goes up to the top there, and you've got your main in, which also goes to the top, and then the out hose from the petcock, the one that goes to the carbs, is this one here, which runs off towards the carburetors. So I disconnected that from the petcock and attached that to one end of the new fuel tap. From the other end of the fuel tap, I got a new piece of fuel hose. This is 8mm inside diameter. Ran a new piece of fuel hose from the tap to the petcock. So all that's really happening is I've put a tap in line in between the vacuum petcock and the carburetors, and then I literally just turn that on when I want to run the bike, when I want to run the engine, and then turn it off if the engine's off, or when the bike's sat. So if the petcock does fail, the fuel will just back up to the tap and it won't go any further into the carbs. yeah, so that's an 8mm inside diameter, that hose. I use that because it fits this new tap. That's got quite a large, you know, the metal. My brain isn't working today. I'm sorry. The you know, the diameter on that tap is quite large, so I needed the 8mm hose, and that fits nicely on the petcock end as well. Don't quote me on that 8mm. You know, check into that yourself. But I mean, this has been on almost a year, and that's working absolutely fine for me. So yeah, that's kind of it really. One little footnote. The only hurdle I came across really, apart from the fact that one of these bolts failed and I had to put a new one in that hold the old vacuum petcock on. The hurdle I came across was this L piece that the exit hose attaches to, that goes into the petcock. When I was trying to get the hose off, that whole L piece popped out. I think there's a little O-ring there that stops flow. I managed to get it back in without taking the whole tap apart, and it isn't leaking, and time has proved that it isn't leaking. I was lucky there, but just be really careful with your hoses when you're trying to get them off. Don't yank them, because they'll just grip even tighter. You know, try and pry them off gently with a flathead or something. I've just noticed the end of this new hose is starting to fray a bit, so I'll keep an eye on that it isn't splitting back. You know, these type of clips can damage the hose because they get out of shape when you tighten them, which can cause some damage to the hose. So I'll keep an eye on that. But yeah, I hope that gives a bit more clarity to the fuel tap thing. So I'm still using the original vacuum petcock because there's no fuel pumps on these bikes. You know, they have to have the vacuum petcock to work, but it's just got the extra tap in there for belt and braces. So anyway, thanks for watching, and catch you soon.